mean, we're talking about a destructive addiction, something that is destroying him, destroying the family, destroying your marriage. I mean, that has some serious consequences, right? But when I started this, it was so interesting because I had like 5 principles, and then the next day, God gave me another principle, and then the next day another principle, and then the next day another principle, until I was up to 10 principles. I don't know. Because God just kept on giving me more, like, and you better have this, and you better have this. So here's what we came up with. Number 1, ask God to give you wisdom on the right time for bringing up your concerns. Next, clearly state your concerns about the destructive or disrespectful aspects of this specific ongoing behavior and make a request for change. He also does not want a 20-minute lecture. I can guarantee that. Most men just want you to say it and say it quickly. I mean, don't go into blah, 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 blah. I mean, they're tuning you out after like a minute, right? Or maybe 30 seconds. Just get to the point, spell it out, state the nature of the problem and why it's causing harm. And also, this is really super important. Since most men need time to process their thoughts, don't pressure them into responding right then and there. That's probably not going to go well, because you know what they're going to revert to? Being defensive. Most men process they're not dumb, don't get me wrong, they just process things differently, especially when someone hits them with something that's kind of like an emotional connection to it. They need to process. So you might say, I've noticed there seems to be a problem with you drinking a lot of alcohol lately, and I'm really concerned. It's when you do that, you're kind of checking out of the family, and we feel like we don't have any connection with you anymore because you're always out in the garage drinking or whatever. Can you just pray about that? Because I really like you to stop. Could you pray about that, and let's talk about it tomorrow? See how he's like, oh, tomorrow. Okay, I can think about this. I guarantee you, for probably 95% of men, that's going to work far better than wanting to get like some kind of resolution right now. And yet many assertive women are like, right now, let's get this taken care of. And he's like, And so he's going to throw up all sorts of defenses, and maybe he'll use anger to try to ward you off, or who knows what, right? So give him some breathing room, perhaps a day or even a few days, and say, would you pray about that? And let's talk again, on Monday, or let's talk again on whatever, right? Okay, a third point, be respectful and kind. God gives a very specific command to wives, Ephesians 5:33, that the wife must respect her husband. And this applies even during a confrontation, right? You need to strive for kindness and compassion, realizing that your husband is weak just as you are weak in some areas too. Romans 15:1 is a good reminder. It says, we who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak. So have some compassion. You're weak in some areas, he's weak in some areas. Try to approach this really compassionately and kindly and lovingly and with respect. And here's another key part. Do remain calm despite any defensive response on his part. Keep talking quietly and gently. Next point, ask your husband if he's willing. Okay, this is probably the next day, by the way. Like, you've already had the initial conversation. Now maybe it's the next day or whatever, and you're going to go into this conversation a little deeper. Ask your husband if he's willing to do whatever it takes to end the addiction. Whatever it takes to end the addiction. That's a key question, isn't it? Because this is not, talk is cheap. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to end this addiction? Which really is the definition of repentance in the Bible, right? Turning away. Say, I don't want to go that way anymore. I'm going to turn away from that, right? God says in Luke 3:8, produce fruit in keeping with repentance. Which means, because a lot of guys, when confronted, or any of us when confronted about an addiction, we're like, oh yeah, I'm going to work on that. It means nothing. Produce fruit in keeping with repentance. That means your husband needs to demonstrate that he's truly serious about working on it. It doesn't mean he's going to overcome this thing overnight. Which one of us have overcome an addiction overnight? Really tough, right? But is he trying? Is he demonstrating that he's really working on this? That's what our hearts want, right? That he's serious about it, that he wants to do something about this. So is he willing to do whatever it takes to demonstrate that he's willing to tackle this problem? And then we need to give him grace as he's working it out, because it might not end the next day or the next month even. It might take several months or a year, but is he working on it? Keep in mind that working to overcome an addiction often means discovering the root cause of the addictive behavior, and always means seeking true comfort from a closer relationship with Jesus. So what could this mean? It could mean a 12-step type program such as AA or NA, right? It could mean seeing a counselor. It could mean meeting with a wise, godly mentor. It could mean going into a treatment program for alcohol or drugs or sex addiction or whatever it is. Your husband is not a monster. He's not evil. He's entangled with an addiction because it's serving a purpose. It's a crutch for him because something's going on inside of him. A hurt, a wound, insecurity, and he's using this as a crutch. So it's so important to find out what that underlying root cause is. The next point is, if your husband will not admit his destructive behavior or doesn't show serious efforts to overcome the addiction, bring the issue before a third party. The third party could be a pastor, or a counselor, or a mentor couple, or even his parents. This is what Jesus instructs us to do in that Matthew 18 section. Remember when he said, go and confront your brother, and if he listens to you, great, but if he doesn't, go before 2 or 3 more people. It's almost like a formula for intervention, isn't it? It's kind of like an intervention recipe. And Laura has shared her own testimony here before that she did exactly this Matthew 18 with her husband with an alcohol issue, and it worked so well, but it was because she did it very lovingly and respectfully. Okay, well that kind of leads into the next step. Can we do the next step real quick? State expectations for change and possible consequences. State expectations for change and possible consequences. Because at this point, you've already stated the problem. You probably asked him to see a third party, and he either refused or he met, but he didn't really listen to what they were having to say. And so it's time to establish boundaries and explain what will happen if he crosses those boundaries. And keep in mind, the goal is not to punish him. The goal is to put some pressure on him to say, hey, do you want to keep your family? Do you want to keep this marriage? Hey. The goal is repentance, that he would turn away from that. And you might say something like this: I've asked you to stop drinking alcohol, but you still are. I believe this could end up slowly destroying our marriage, our family, and your health. I love you, and I'm really concerned. I'm asking you to enter a treatment program or regularly attend a 12-step program to figure out why alcohol has such a hold on you and how to end that hold. Please think about this and pray about this, and let's talk again tomorrow. Always giving breathing room for him. Just a little breathing room so he doesn't get into this real defensive thing and it's not this back and forth. Give him a little breathing room. You've already told him what the requested change is, right? The next day, if he says yes, great. If he says no, then it's time to ask God in prayer and maybe some godly female mentors whether it's time to draw some serious boundaries and spell out the consequences for crossing those boundaries. And if you choose to do the boundary thing, you might say something like this: I love you and I want to build a wonderful life with you, but I won't stand by and watch you destroy our marriage and family and your health through drinking. So if you continue drinking like this and refuse to seek help through AA or a treatment center, I'm going to ask you to leave our home and decide if you really want to be part of our family or not. I'm not talking about divorce, but if you do this even one more time, I will ask you to move out until you decide to get serious about this problem. I mean, I've tried to condense this into like a mini sentence here, but I think you get the drift of how we could approach something like that. The key here is don't throw out a consequence if you do not intend to follow through with that consequence. Okay, let's just quickly hit the last two. The ninth one is to pray for your husband, but I don't want to underestimate that. That is so huge, right? Prayer, tremendously important. Only God has the ability to change your husband's heart. I mean, you can't do it, but God can. Ezekiel 36 is where God says that he can change the heart of stone to a heart of flesh. So he can change your husband's heart. And the last one, I wasn't even going to put this in there, but I've seen too many women have a problem in this area, so I'm going to say it. Be careful to avoid things that would tempt your husband to engage in his addiction. Romans 14:13 says, make up your mind not to put a stumbling block or obstacle in the way of a brother or sister. And this means if you have a husband who struggles with alcohol, can you not have alcohol in the house? I know a couple of Christian women whose husbands are alcoholics and they insist on continuing to drink themselves, and they have their refrigerator stocked with wine and beer, and I'm like, yes, do you have the right to do that? Yes, you do. Is it kind? No, it's not kind, and it's kind of setting him up, right?